Well, for today's project, I'm going to try to make a plaster mold and casting of this skull. The skull was donated by my brother. It's basically a really cool candle. It's entirely made out of wax, and we're going to try to recreate plaster props out of it. Now, the first step is you have to create a box for your mold. So just some real thin scrap wood I had laying around. I've taped the sides together so that we can just split the edges to take it apart easily, which we'll have to do once or twice during the process. I've also numbered all of the corners and edges, both inside and out, so that we can reassemble the box in the exact same shape. That'll help us make the mold the right size. So we'll go on to the next step. Okay, I've gone through and filled in some of the undercuts and other areas where the mold might bind to it with red plasticine clay. The next step will be to build up half of this mold with clay and then put it in the box. Just an update of the process of filling it in. It's starting to look pretty freaky. Okay, here's the completed mold. It's ready for the plaster. I'm actually going to go sit this in the freezer for a few minutes. As I mentioned before, the skull is made completely out of wax, and the plaster Paris puts off quite a bit of heat when it cures, so I'm a little concerned that it might deform the shape of the skull, so I'm going to take that precaution, see if it helps or not. Well, here's the filled mold. Looks pretty good, except for the fact that after I started pouring the plaster in, I realized that I had forgot to put on the releasing agent, so more than likely our plaster is going to bind directly with the skull itself. So I guess we'll just have to see how that goes. Okay, I've taken the mold and I've cut a few of the edges so that we can open it up and see what we've got here. Overall, it seems to have worked pretty good, except I didn't seal it well enough and some of the plaster slipped through, but that shouldn't be a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of the plasticine off and see what we've got inside. Well, here's what we've got. It's pretty good. The only concern is that mold is, or the skull is bound in there pretty tight, so I'm going to have to work at digging it out. Normally you wouldn't do this step at this point, but I need to smooth out some of the edges of the mold. You can see where it wasn't exactly flat, and also ensure that I can actually take this skull out at the end when we need to. Well, it took quite a bit of work, but I was finally able to get it so that it pulls right out of here, kind of at an angle. And everything looks intact. And that doesn't look like much at this point, but it should be exactly what we need. I've cleaned up the mold a bit. I've also dug in some keying holes in the corners. It gives the mold a place to lock in when you put the two halves back together. Next, it's going to go back in the form. We're going to coat the whole thing in liquid soap as a releasing agent and pour another coat of plaster on top of it. Looks like it'll turn out pretty good. My only concern is this little area in here. We can see that the mold is kind of indented inwards. Might give us some problems, but we'll see what happens. Well, I was able to separate the mold. Everything came out pretty good. The candle got a little bit roughed up, but it still looks pretty cool. And here's the actual two-piece mold. And everything on there looks pretty good. So we'll have to go ahead and put something in it and see what kind of a cast we get out of it. As you can see, I've made two castings so far from the mold. The first I made with expanding foam. It was an idea I got up from the internet. And honestly, I wasn't too impressed with it. It doesn't hold the shape very well, and there's hardly any detail. Second, I made out of plaster Paris, and it's turned out pretty good. Actually went in and had to touch up some of the details, like the eye sockets using a Dremel. Overall, it turned out good. The only real problem, it came from my lousy mixing of the plaster. You can see it's kind of flaking and breaking apart in some areas. I made it too watery. But overall, it turned out pretty good.